Pandora spun toward the unfamiliar female voice. Behind her stood a ghost. Stood maybe wasn't the right word. Hovered was more correct. The ghost was about 5 feet tall, 80 years old, and had a helmet of cotton candy pink hair that matched the pantsuit she was wearing. Pandora took a wild guess. Gertrude? One and the same. You the new lady of the house? No, I'm just visiting. Pandora had seen her share of supernatural weirdness in her time, but this was the topper. Gertrude's eyes narrowed. Is he some relation to my Ulysses? Pandora nodded. Distant nephew. Gertrude slapped her thigh. I knew it. Same eyes. Plus, I can tell a familiar when I see one. A familiar? I tried to give him a hint, but he's got a classic case of denial going on. Gertrude waved her hand at Pandora, as if assessing her. Your magic's a little wobbly on a good day, isn't it? Pandora lifted her chin. I do my best. Oh, it's not your fault, dearie. Gertrude levitated so she could look down her nose at Pandora in a very conspiratorial way. But around the stud muffin, it works just fine. Am I right? No one says stud muffin anymore. Pandora bit her lip as she thought back. What does it mean that my magic works around him? He's a familiar. And not just any familiar. He's yours. She gave Pandora a naughty wink. Touching him will awaken feelings in both of you, but to seal the bond and keep him from bonding with any other witch, you need to get a little more intimate. You know what I mean? You need to get... I know what intimate means, so settle down. You could at least kiss him, that's all I'm saying. Gertrude hovered close enough that Pandora realized she was wearing false eyelashes. But why doesn't he know he's one if that's what he is? Gertrude shot up into the air and hovered several feet above the floor, her gaze shifting over Pandora's shoulder. Gotta go! Wait! Pandora put her hand out, but Gertrude was gone. Behind her, the attic door opened. You okay up here? She turned. Cole stood at the landing. Gertrude was right. He really was a stud muffin. Yeah, I'm fine. I was just coming back down. Were you talking to someone? No. Yes, I don't know. She rubbed her forehead. I think I know what's going on with you, but you're not going to like it. I don't like it now. Tell me your thoughts. I'll be as open-minded as I can be. Gertrude's words rang in Pandora's brain. This is going to sound crazy, but you might be something called a familiar. Familiar with what? No, a familiar. A witch's companion. His expression didn't change for a moment. Then he started laughing. Okay, you got me. Good one. No, I'm serious. He held his hands up. Pandora, come on. That's so bananas, I don't even know where to start. You said you'd be open-minded. Yes, but a witch's companion? As in your companion? Is this your way of trying to get me to believe? It's cute, I'll give you that. Kiss him, a voice whispered in her ear. So she did. The Romans were now at war with the Volscian nation, whose principal city was Coralie. When, therefore, Cominius the consul had invested this important place, the rest of the Volscians, fearing it would be taken, mustered up whatever force they could from all parts to relieve it, designing to give the Romans battle before the city, and so attacked them on both sides. Cominius, to avoid this inconvenience, divided his army, marching himself with one body to encounter the Volscians on their approach from without, and leaving Titus Lartius, one of the bravest Romans of his time, to command the other, and continue the siege. Those within Coralie, despising now the smallness of their number, made a sally upon them, and prevailed at first, and pursued the Romans into their trenches. Here it was that Martius, flying out with a slender company, and cutting those in pieces that first engaged him, obliged the other assailants to slacken their speed, and then with loud cries called upon the Romans to renew the battle. For he had, what Cato thought a great point in a soldier, not only strength of hand and stroke, but also a voice and look that of themselves were a terror to an enemy. Diverse of his own party now rallying and making up to him, the enemies soon retreated. But Martius, not content to see them draw off and retire, pressed hard upon the rear, and drove them as they fled away in haste to the very gates of their city, where, perceiving the Romans to fall back from their pursuit, beaten off by the multitude of darts poured in upon them from the walls, and that none of his followers had the hardiness to think of falling in pell-mell among the fugitives, and so entering a city full of enemies in arms, he nevertheless stood and urged them to the attempt, crying out that fortune had now set open Coralie, not so much to shelter the vanquished as to receive the conquerors. Seconded by a few that were willing to venture with him, he bore along through the crowd, made good his passage, and thrust himself into the gate through the midst of them, nobody at first daring to resist him. But when the citizens, on looking about, saw the very small number that had entered, they now took courage and came up and attacked them. As I recall it, the dialogue ran something as follows. Well, Jeeves, here we are, what? Yes, sir. I mean to say, home again. Precisely, sir. Seems ages since I went away. Yes, sir. Have a good time at Ascot? Most agreeable, sir. Win anything? Quite a satisfactory sum, thank you, sir. Good. Well, Jeeves, what's new on the Rialto? Anybody been phoning or calling or anything during my abs? Mr. Finknottle, sir, has been a frequent caller. I stared. Indeed, it would not be too much to say that I gaped. Mr. Finknottle? Yes, sir. You don't mean Mr. Finknottle? Yes, sir. But Mr. Finknottle's not in London? Yes, sir. Well, I'm blowed. And I'll tell you why I was blowed. I found it scarcely possible to give credence to his statement. This Finknottle, you see, was one of those freaks you come across from time to time during life's journey who can't stand London. He lived year in and year out, covered with moss, in a remote village down in Lincolnshire, never coming up, even for the Eton and Harrow match. And when I asked him once if he didn't find the time hang a bit heavy on his hands, he said no, because he had a pond in his garden and studied the habits of newts. I couldn't imagine what could have brought the chap up to the great city. I would have been prepared to bet that as long as the supply of newts didn't give out, nothing could have shifted him from that village of his. Are you sure? Yes, sir. You got the name correctly, Finknottle? Yes, sir. Well, it's the most extraordinary thing. There is a lesion about the size of a strawberry on your proximal tibia. I don't think we can rule out sarcoma. Sarcoma. The word swelled and ricocheted in her head. What is that? Ty asked. Cancer. She couldn't say it. Couldn't force the word from her lips, because if she did, it would make it real. She ground her teeth together, fighting tears. She felt like she was underwater, trying to find the surface in the middle of the night with nothing to guide her. It's not cancer. It's not cancer. Her body trembled and shook. Damn it, she was not going to let a word scare her into silence. Cancer flew from her lungs, full of venom. At the same time, John said, bone cancer. Bone cancer? Ty reached for her, the disbelief and fear in his voice as real as his hand holding her tight. How can that be? She's not sick. That doesn't make sense. She tried to concentrate on Ty squeezing her shoulder, the smell of him, his leg pushing against hers, anything other than the voice in her head repeating, no. God, please, no. I'm sorry, John said. Sarcomas are not a common group of cancers. They arise in the bone and connective tissues, and in most cases they're found by accident, when looking for other causes of aches and pains. I'd like to do blood work and a biopsy so we know exactly what we're dealing with." "A biopsy?" Ty asked, tightening his hold on Ayla. "What does that involve?" As John explained the outpatient procedure, Ayla caught only a few words. Numb the area, needle, 10-minute procedure, guided by a fluoroscopy. Her heart hammered against her ribs, and fear swamped her so badly she could barely breathe. "Can we do it now? The biopsy, right now?" "Ayla, don't you want to have time to think it over?" Ty asked. "No. He just said, I need a biopsy. You trust him, right?" Tears welled in her eyes, and she was shaking all over, but she refused to let her tears fall. John was wrong. She was sure of it. She ran and swam and biked and skied. She didn't have cancer. "Of course," Ty said. "But then I want to get it over with." "Would you tell me, please," said Alice a little timidly, "why are you painting those roses?" 5 and 6 said nothing, but looked at 2. 2 began in a low voice. "Why, the fact is, you see, miss, this here ought to have been a red rose tree, and we put a white one in by mistake. And if the Queen was to find out, we should all have our heads cut off, you know. So, you see, miss, we're doing our best before she comes to, At this moment, 5, who had been anxiously looking across the garden, called out, "The Queen! The Queen!" And the 3 gardeners instantly threw themselves flat upon their faces. There was a sound of many footsteps, and Alice looked round, eager to see the Queen. When the procession came opposite to Alice, they all stopped and looked at her, and the Queen said severely, "Who is this?" She said it to the Knave of Hearts, who only bowed and smiled in reply. "Idiot," said the Queen, tossing her head impatiently, and turning to Alice, she went on, "What's your name, child?" "My name is Alice, so please your Majesty," said Alice very politely. "And who are these?" said the Queen, pointing to the 3 gardeners who were lying round the rose tree. For you see, as they were lying on their faces, and the pattern on their backs the same as the rest of the pack, she could not tell whether they were gardeners or soldiers or courtiers or 3 of her own children. "How should I know?" said Alice, surprised at her own courage. "It's no business of mine." The Queen turned crimson with fury, and after glaring at her for a moment like a wild beast, she began screaming, "Off with her head! Off with it!" "Nonsense," said Alice very loudly and decidedly, and the Queen was silent. The King laid his hand upon her arm, and timidly said, "Consider, my dear, she is only a child." The Queen turned angrily away from him, and said to the Knave, "Turn them over!" The Knave did so, very carefully, with 1 foot. "Get up!" said the Queen in a shrill, loud voice, and the 3 gardeners instantly jumped up and began bowing to the King, the Queen, the royal children, and everyone else. "Leave off that!" screamed the Queen. "You make me giddy." And then, turning to the rose tree, she went on, "What have you been doing here?" "May it please your Majesty," said 2, in a very humble tone, going down on 1 knee as he spoke. "We were trying—" "I see," said the Queen, who had meanwhile been examining the roses. "Off with their heads." And the procession moved on, 3 of the soldiers remaining behind to execute the unfortunate gardeners, who ran to Alice for protection. "You shan't be beheaded," said Alice, and she put them into a large flower pot that stood near. The 3 soldiers wandered about for a minute or 2, looking for them, and then quietly marched off after the others. "Are their heads off?" shouted the Queen. "Their heads are gone, if it please your Majesty," the soldiers shouted in reply. "That's right," shouted the Queen. "Can you play croquet?" The soldiers were silent, and looked at Alice, as the question was evidently meant for her.
"Yes,"
shouted Alice.
"Come on, then,"
roared the Queen, and Alice joined the procession, wondering very much what would happen next. Most of us have a problem with everyday poor sleep, low-grade exhaustion, and sleepiness during the day that most of us experience on a more or less regular basis. Because you don't feel good during the day, you spend time, and indeed money, on trying to feel better. The multivitamin pill to supposedly keep you healthy, the cup of coffee to get you going, the chocolate bar is a treat because you don't feel good, the energy pill or drink to give you a boost during the day, the glass of wine to help you relax. At the end of the week, you treat yourself to a spa treatment, and you cannot wait for the holiday when you can finally chill out. Just imagine how much better life could be and how much more productive you would be if each day you were at your best. So why are you going through each day at less than your full potential? The most likely explanation is because you are not sleeping well. Simply getting better sleep will make you feel better each and every day. Sleeping better tonight will make you feel better tomorrow. Getting better sleep tomorrow night will make you feel better the next day, and so on. So how to sleep better? As parents, we ensure our children wind down before bedtime. Bath, story, lullaby, bed. Because we know it works. But what is true for children also holds true for adults. It's just that in our busy lives, we seem to forget the basics. But really, how hard can it be? Imagine putting your children to bed, spending a few hours with your partner, and then running yourself a nice warm bath with your favorite bubbles, candles, nice music softly playing in the background, and maybe a small glass of wine. You luxuriate in the bath, soaking away all the cares and worries of the day. Then, just as it starts to cool, you get out, put on a big, fluffy toweling robe, and then get into a bed that has been freshly made. That would work, wouldn't it? So why don't you do it? Imagine your partner is upstairs in the bath. You are sitting in your candlelit drawing room, comfortable in your leather button-back armchair, wearing your velvet smoking jacket, a fire burning in the grate, your faithful hounds asleep at your feet, a generous measure of a fine single malt in a lead crystal glass in one hand, and a large Havana cigar in the other. Okay, maybe not everyone's idea of an ideal end to the day, but admit it, it comes close. Getting better sleep should not be a chore or an inconvenience. It should be something we choose to do, something we want to do, and something that can be very pleasurable to do. With a glance over his shoulder, he saw two men in black suits coming up the sidewalk, flanking him at the corner. One of the men said, "John, we need to talk to you." He gave no reaction and started across the street. They followed, and on the other side they moved ahead of him and blocked his way. Staring through big dark lenses, Johnny Rosselli said, "You know how it goes, fellas. If you've got a problem, go talk to my attorney." The second man said, "You don't want your attorney to know about this." The first said, "This is different, John. Something new. You need to take a look." The second man held out a buff-colored envelope. Johnny looked at the package, but kept his hands at his sides. "Listen, for your own good. The Bureau knows who you are." Johnny looked past him, as if no one were there and nothing had been said. "Do you understand? We know everything." The first man held out a business card. It read, Dupar's Restaurant, with an address in Thousand Oaks. "This is a place where we can meet, after you've had a look in the package." Johnny glanced at the card, but did not take it, and he did not take the package, saying, "If you've got a subpoena, give it to my attorney. I don't know what you're talking about." He started walking again. "Have a nice day, John," said the second man. "We'll be seeing you." Halfway to the next corner, he stopped and looked back. The 2 FBI agents were gone. "You have a nice day, too. Vaffanculo. In the ass." He entered his place on the 8th floor of the Glen Towers Apartments, a large, modern, sleekly furnished apartment with a sweeping balcony view of western Beverly Hills. Slipped under the door was the envelope one of the men on the street had tried to give him. He picked it up. They were formal portraits, taken against plain backgrounds in a studio setting. One was of a dark-haired, dark-eyed woman in her 30s. The other, a grim-faced schoolboy, about 10 years of age. He leaned close to the photographs. He looked at one and then the other. He finished the vodka and lit another cigarette. Only a handful of people in the world could have connected his present identity to this kid from the distant past, and might have been willing to give that information to the law. One of them was going to wish he was dead. Maybe you're young and brimming with ambition. Maybe you're young and you're struggling. Maybe you've made that first couple million, signed your first deal, been selected to some elite group, or maybe you're already accomplished enough to last a lifetime. Maybe you're stunned to find out how empty it is at the top. Maybe you're charged with leading others through a crisis. Maybe you just got fired. Maybe you just hit rock bottom. Wherever you are, whatever you're doing, your worst enemy already lives inside you, your ego. Not me, you think. No one would ever call me an egomaniac. Perhaps you've always thought of yourself as a pretty balanced person. But for people with ambitions, talents, drives, and potential to fulfill, ego comes with the territory. Precisely what makes us so promising as thinkers, doers, creatives, and entrepreneurs, what drives us to the top of those fields, makes us vulnerable to this darker side of the psyche. The need to be better than, more than, recognized for, far past any reasonable utility, that's ego. It's the sense of superiority and certainty that exceeds the bounds of confidence and talent. With every ambition and goal we have, big or small, ego is there, undermining us, on the very journey we've put everything into pursuing. At any given time in life, people find themselves at one of 3 stages. We're aspiring to something, trying to make a dent in the universe. We have achieved success, perhaps a little, perhaps a lot. Or we have failed, recently or continually. Most of us are in these stages in a fluid sense. We're aspiring until we succeed until we fail, or until we aspire to more, and after we fail, we can begin to aspire or succeed again. Ego is the enemy every step along this way. In a sense, ego is the enemy of building, of maintaining, and of recovering. And therefore, the 3 parts that this book is organized into: aspire, success, failure. The aim of that structure is simple: to help you suppress ego early before bad habits take hold, to replace the temptations of ego with humility and discipline when we experience success, and to cultivate strength and fortitude so that when fate turns against you, you're not wrecked by failure. In short, it will help us be humble in our aspirations, gracious in our success, resilient in our failure. This book that you're listening to is written around one optimistic assumption. Your ego is not some power you're forced to satiate at every turn. It can be managed. It can be directed. When we remove ego, we're left with what is real. What replaces ego is humility, yes, but rock-hard humility and confidence. Whereas ego is artificial, this type of confidence can hold weight. Ego is stolen. Confidence is earned. Ego is self-anointed. Its swagger is artifice. One is girding yourself. The other, gaslighting. It's the difference between potent and poisonous. Some learn humility. Some choose ego. Some are prepared for the vicissitudes of fate, both positive and negative. Others are not. Which will you choose? Who will you be? You've picked this book because you sense that you'll need to answer this question eventually, consciously or not. Well, here we are. Let's get to it.